So, Alexander Olesen, CEO and co-founder of Babylon MicroFarms, thank you for returning again for round two on the Vertical Farming podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Excited to be here.
I guess you had a good time if you decided to come back for round two.
Something like that, as in it is interesting time in the industry and an interesting time for Babylon. So I'm excited to kind of share some updates and
Yeah.
chat with you.
I think what's interesting for me, and obviously in the beginning, the first rounds are getting to know about the company, getting to know about the founders. I was on with your co-founder, Graham Smith, last time, and Indoor AgCon was my very first indoor farming conference last year in 2022. But the thing that did stand out for me, and I told you this when I saw you this year, is the fact that you've got, smartly enough, a Babylon MicroFarms display front and center as people are registering for the event. So since Indoor Icon, so last year was my first one. As far as conferences go, had you been going for a while with Indoor Icon?
Yeah, so we're a big fan of Indoor Con, and I think it's a good industry get together. Although I would say it's one of the only industry conferences we do because we're not the same as most of the other companies there. And I think it's always, obviously the same fundamentals. We're growing plants and helping grow food at the same to some degree. But for us, we spend a lot of time at customer conferences. So in the food service world, healthcare, education, that's where you'll find us most of the time. But it was exciting to see Indoor Con, and it has grown so much in
Yeah.
the last few years, which I think is a testament to the industry and growth behind it.
And how many had you been to so far?
So we did one pre-COVID, which was a completely different thing. It was like a tiny get together compared to what we saw a few months ago. And I think we've done the last two.
Okay. Yeah, and even between last year and this year, from everything that we've heard at the conference, they doubled in size. So kudos to Suzette and Brian and the whole team there, just in terms of what they've done to bring awareness. It's challenging. There's so much competition, especially now. I feel like there's an indoor farming conference popping up all over the world lately.
Yeah, there are a few out there. Although there was one that I think has been canceled, Cumulus.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Cumulus. I've heard about that one. Yeah.
That was, I don't know, but I guess there's a lot of change going on in the space at the moment. So.
Yeah, to say the least. When you go there, and I don't know if this is something you had thought about or something I'm always curious from a marketing perspective, because there's a lot of people that go into the pavilion and they get to go and make the rounds and see all businesses and the farms there and all the technologies. But somehow you managed to secure some prime real estate front and center. So it's literally as you're going in and as you're going out of the conference, even just from a curiosity standpoint, and almost like even for Indoor Icon, just to have that visual of like that visual display you have in the front is really great.
Yeah, I think it serves both purposes, right? Obviously, we were pretty happy with the location, and one of the reasons we were there is because it was co-located with the National Grocers Association.
Right.
So, for us, we see retail and food service as prime locations for people to grow their own food on site, and we do it in a way that they can do it in a safe, reliable, convenient format.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of hopefully bridged the gap nicely between the expo hall and the Grocers Association.
What type of conversations were you having there?
I think there are a lot of things around like what can you grow? Why does this make sense? You've got guys in the next room talking about hundreds of acres of greenhouse, and then you're in here with something that's 15 square feet. Like, how does that work? And I think that's a really common question. We're like, that's because this is designed for on-site production. So these are small volumes of high value ingredients designed to be in a way that captivates the end consumer. So the value proposition is very different. And I think for a lot of the grocers, especially the ones that are more local, farm table, and it's not only grocers, right? There are a lot of kind of urban agriculture enthusiasts who are there from the food service world as well. They're like, yeah, we get it. This is exactly why we think indoor farming and urban agriculture is so great. It's because you can captivate the end consumer and help kind of thread that needle between kind of local and healthy sourcing and growing your own food. And I think, that's kind of a space that we fit into that's very different to the big commercial greenhouses and plant factories.
Did you spend some time in the National Grocers Conference as well?
Very briefly, yeah.
And so how many other conferences now at this point now are you attending every year?
I actually don't know off the top of my head, but plenty. As I say, I think really across the food service realm, we're there trying to get units and be in front of people and let them know that growing their own food is an option, because I think there's still an education gap where a lot of places are like, wait, I didn't even know this was an option, or
Yeah.
they've seen the status quo. And I think that is something we challenge is like, you can go to Lowe's and drill a hole in a PVC pipe and have a hydroponic farm if you want to look after it every single day.
Yeah.
And it is a little science experiment. And that is for most small scale growers, that is still the status quo. It towers, it's PVC pipe, and it is a science experiment that you have to look after every day.
Yeah.
That's great. We're trying to apply some technology and some nice design and a service to kind of expand the market and make it possible for people who have no interest in trying to be a farmer to grow their own food, right? And I think that's trying to show people that that's possible is really what we've been trying to do, and conferences are a great vehicle for that.
Well, it doesn't hurt that you have a beautiful form factor in terms of what you're offering. Specifically now, you've got gallery. So can you talk a little bit about, as I mentioned earlier, it was 2 years since we chatted last time. Safe to say a lot has changed since then. But think about where you were February 2021, what you were tasked with as, the leader of Babylon, and, what you were focused on. And looking back over those past 2 years to present day, talk a little bit about how well you feel you've executed on what the plan was.
Yeah, so if I just wind the clock back a couple of years, I think we'd just come out of 3 years of iterating prototypes. We just secured some early contracts, and I think we got the technology to a point where we were very happy with the functionality, but it wrapped up in a way that we felt comfortable scaling, and that's really what the gallery addresses. So we'd got the technology to where we'd want it to be from a remote management point of view, but we had then adjusting the hardware and the sort of design for manufacturability. And that's really what the gallery does. So it brings kind of a new level of aesthetic. It's way easier to install and manufacture. And it's also way easier to maintain for our clients. So I think there are so many minutiae learnings that you just simply wouldn't know unless you'd had a lot of units out in the field with customers. So collecting that feedback, iterating on the software side as well as the hardware, that's really where the gallery elevates this concept to a new level. And we're now ready to scale with it because it is kind of, we think, a category defining product that makes it easier than ever before to grow your own fresh food.
So for folks who are not familiar, and I'll encourage folks to go back and listen to that first interview we had just to get an overview of your origin story and how Babylon started. But for people that may not be familiar with the product offering and who an ideal partner or client is, can you talk people through that?
Yeah, so our goal is to empower businesses and communities to grow their own fresh food using remotely managed vertical farms. So we build turnkey modules that are sort of hydroponic farms that are self-contained. And then we actually run a lot of the day-to-day maintenance remotely. So that's nutrients, pH, irrigation, lighting, all of the kind of day-to-day variables you need to control for optimal plant growth. We do that remotely, so the user doesn't have to worry about it. They're responsible for planting, harvesting, and cleaning. And we provide a service and account managers in between to just streamline it and integrate it into their workflow. So our go-to-market has focused on institutional food service operators, property managers, restaurants, that kind of dynamic where we're able to allow them to grow their own sort of fresh ingredients year round. So we had some early success there. And yeah, we're tailored experiences for the B2B market is kind of where we're focusing our efforts today.
Has the partner or client mix changed since we last spoke about who you're working with and who this would be an ideal fit for?
It's grown, but the focus is still the same. And I would say just in terms of executing on our plans, that focus is everything. I think when we look at, again, compared to the status quo, we have elevated the concept. It's easy to use, but we've also implemented a lot of features for food safety, traceability, and scaling, and tracking the efficacy of the farms, that we know how much is growing and who's doing it. And these are really important features for large food service companies who are looking to scale on-site growing. If you're looking at a raised bed or an alternative like urban farming solution, they don't offer that traceability. And I think that's where we're really playing to our strengths and catering to these larger corporate clients. And yeah, we're focused across kind of healthcare, education, some corporate settings and some other food service and retail applications, and that focus is served as well.
I was looking at the unit on the site, and it seems like there's been a lot of thought and consideration into this next version of it, and just some of the things that stand out for me, the fact that it's 55% less plastic, on-site compostable growth medium, more recyclable components, 30 minutes a week to keep up, which I think is great, 45 varieties of produce, and the fact that it's zero pesticides. Obviously, I could list all the improvements in terms of cameras and sensors, but how much thought was put into, this idea of making it easy to use, but also, towards an eye towards sustainability and obviously questions people have about plastic and recycling and impact to the environment?
Yeah, so there are a couple of buckets. I think for the unit itself, that's really kind of us internally knowing that we're now setting the standard.
Yeah.
So food safety and ultimately kind of the sustainability of operating a farm site. That is one of the main reasons people are investing in indoor farming across the spectrum is that it's a more sustainable solution and we better be setting the standard for that. So eliminating single-use plastic, these are things that are just important to us as a company and our customers appreciate that. And then the other bucket is really like it's happy customers and healthy crops. Those are the two things that matter. And so everything we do is to kind of serve those needs. So whether that's adding new features, changing the design to ensure that the crops are growing in a more healthy and reliable way, that's like absolutely kind of table stakes. And then the other layer is just around like ultimately making it easy for people. Making it easy for people is also about helping them avoid making mistakes.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of kind of features, whether that's through software or through sensors that are there to catch issues before they become real issues for the plants. And those two things working in harmony together has taken, actually it's our 6th anniversary as a company. Wow. Later this month. And so 6 years of R&D and trial and error to figure out a way to really keep the crops healthy and the customers happy at scale, right? Because that's the thing is like the status quo is running this farm like a science experiment every day. And when people have looked at running distributed farms, that usually meant sending a person between those distributed farms every day. Yeah. Or multiple times a week to manually run them. And we have kind of figured out a way to do that remotely. And that really opens up a lot of possibilities as to who can start running these farms successfully.
Would you say that that's always been the vision from the moment you started this idea of having it being run remotely? And how has that affected your decisions about the makeup of the team as you look to grow and hire?
Yeah, so the remote management piece came out a lot of trial and error. Like I think you may remember our founding story. Like we started out as a research project looking at humanitarian applications for hydroponic farms, and we were really thinking about what's the smallest farm that could feed someone or support their family, support a business. And that was about 7 years ago. That was a radical departure from the big farms that are still the status quo today. So we were really just like, well, it is technically possible to grow enough food to feed someone in a very small area using a hydroponic farm. What's stopping that from being a reality? And that is where the whole notion of remote management came in and the service that we've built. We're like, okay, so if we could actually control the complexities of the user experience remotely and the customer doesn't even have to think about that, then you're going to really create a new user experience that could unlock the potential of this. Because it goes without saying that people want to grow their own food. We've been doing that throughout history. This is a new form factor that's allowing people to do it year round in urban environments where they may not have been able to do it before. The remote management kind of evolved. Felt like, okay, if we could remove all of these friction points, then who's going to start doing it? And that's what we're seeing today. We've got LinkedIn, we've got IKEA, we've got cruise ships, we've got all these people now who are like, wait, I can grow my own food. And they're starting to do it. So it's really exciting to see that new adoption. And we have all sorts of kind of fringe use cases coming at us inbound now, which is exciting to see as this market heats up. And I really think none of that would be possible if you were still asking those people to learn the intricate science of like hydroponic agriculture. And because we're remotely managing it there, people are now getting creative with the different applications for on-site farming.
What are some of the niche applications or markets that you hadn't probably even thought would be a use case for this?
I think one thing I see a lot of, which gets me pretty excited, is around like being self-sufficient for certain ingredients. I think it's an aspirational goal for us, but really getting the units down to a point where you can tell me how many pounds and ounces of a given ingredient you use, and I'll tell you how many microfarm units you would need to meet that need. And then you're self-sufficient. That is something we're seeing more of, which is really encouraging. And then the other one is just on the use cases. Like we have, senior living communities who have like a weekly harvest celebration in the salad bar, and like that's creating a very unique and special moment for those seniors where they're able to engage in farming all year round. It's like those are sort of cool applications we see. And then the recent one on a cruise ship, I think that was the world's first installation on a cruise ship. They're actually doing more of those projects now. That was it's no more than a one-off. But yeah, they're
Yeah.
now growing food on the seven seas wherever they are, and I think that's super cool.
I wonder if that's something like a claim to say that you're the first to grow leafy greens
I
on the
think
sea, open seas.
I'm waiting for SpaceX to call up. We're ready.
I think you partnered with iGrow News, or they mentioned you in this discussion around the importance of urban farms. You and I actually took part in a tour of a food desert in Las Vegas. So I'm curious about your thoughts about the importance of shining a light on that problem, this idea of urban farms, the role of government. I know you've got an opinion about how they can help in this task as well.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I just want to shout out to Green Side Up Farms who gave us that tour
Yeah.
of the Las Vegas food deserts. And I think they're doing great work. And I think it's tested, they're a great case study actually of a lot of things we're seeing where you have local groups who are taking up indoor farming and trying to run different types of urban farms across the US. They're people we're actively seeking to work with. So if people listening to this run an indoor urban farming initiative in any city, we can partner with them to install farms in the area. And we're hoping to do that with Green Side Up actually. And I think that's just part of this trend, right? Greening up our cities is going to happen. It's
Yeah.
happening right now. And there are lots of different kind of form factors emerging. The need for local service operators is key. And also the need for local government involvement. I think we've started to see a trend in that direction. And we're a little bit of an outlier because we don't really fit the mold for traditional but indoor farms. But we've seen some pretty exciting grants and subsidies becoming available for electricity and things like that, but tailored primarily for the larger scale growers. And I think in an ideal state, the indoor farming sector would be subsidized in a way similar to renewable energy. I think once the soft benefits and the social benefits of indoor farming are understood, as well as the savings on emissions from not shipping stuff all around the world and the waste that comes with that, I can see that happening. It's just really, we need to be more transparent with the data to have more success stories. And certainly for our space, if the subsidies were available, whether it's on the manufacturing electricity, it would completely change the business model. That's the path we're on right now. We're driving the cost down of our units as fast as we can within the resources we have. And the goal is, and we see it with every step down in cost, being able to save money on the produce compared to buying it from that farm that shipped it all the way across the country. Right now, it's only kind of a handful of high value herbs and microgreens. But as the cost of our units comes down, we're kind of unlocking new crops that can be commercially viable. And I think that trend is similar across the industry. So yeah, any incentives that can exist to further that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, in addition to the round you raised, you also received a grant as well.
Yeah, we've been lucky. We pursued every angle that
Yeah.
we needed to get started, and the National Science Foundation has been great for us. It is one of the more exciting pieces of technology that we've developed. So in short, right, everyone tracks the same input variables. It is pH, EC, nutrients, the irrigation, like everyone kind of tracks those. It's the output that matters.
Yeah.
And right now, in most cases, you're manually tracking that. So the sort of coloring of the leaf, the flavor, the yield. And what we developed with the National Science Foundation is a method of using our cameras to actually track the growth rate of the leaves, spot imperfections, and that is essentially automatically tracking the output so that you don't need human intervention. And it's in early days now, but that is super exciting for us as we think about scaling a distributed network of farms. You need to be able to have that feedback loop in a way that can be automated. And so that's something we're really trying to build in. And the grant funding allowed us to do that because it was pretty out there. We wouldn't put it in our day-to-day business plan, but the fact that there are innovation and research grants available that identified that as a need and we're able to build that is going to help with our own commercialization and potentially benefit the industry is really exciting.
I think the challenge that some companies face when looking at the opportunities available with grants, I think, is just the overwhelming amount of detail that needs to go into. You need a skill set to apply for these, to know how to write these, to have the time to do them, and also the time for when you receive them. There was one that recently was just, I think, expired at the end of March, but I think it was like $7.5 million, I think, for urban farming. But when you look at it, the money wouldn't have been available, I think, till sometime in September. So I think when people looking at it's not something obviously that's going to be a quick fix, and it's something you probably need a bit of a skill set in order to think about how to write these in a way that has the best chance of success of receiving them.
Yeah, they're a commitment. You really have to kind of deliver on the work that you set out
Yeah.
to unlock the funding, and that. So for us, it's just really important to apply to things that are aligned with our product roadmap, and we've done that. But yeah, they're cumbersome, but I think ultimately, like all these things, make time if it matters.
Yes. So talk a little bit about the work that went into raising this round. How long was this process for folks that may not be familiar with what it takes to raise a round of this size? And talk a little bit about the relationship with your investors as well. And just curious about that, what that journey was like.
It was rough. I think this environment is tough. I think in the time that we were raising, as unfortunately we had largely closed everything before the Silicon Valley Bank
Yeah.
crisis. However, the environment has been changing for quite some time. But I think ultimately we got good fundamentals. We've got a product in the market that is ready. We've got it UL listed. It has reached a kind of maturity that our customers are really happy, and the fundamentals are good. So we've just got to execute on our plan, fill our backlog of orders, and continue growing. So I think investors appreciated that and saw that there was real substance to our business in a way that perhaps in this environment others may not have. And we're also at a stage where we're still small enough. I think that we're raising what we need to get to the next milestone, and I think that again we're lucky in a way to be smaller than some of the other companies in the space. I don't know if you saw the news this week. I think there are a couple of other companies that are shutting down, and it's really tough to see that. But again, we hadn't raised big venture capital money, so the expectations perhaps weren't as high. And so for us, it's just about execution. And when we are lucky to have great follow-on from our existing investor base and to attract some new ones that really want to help see us execute.
How much have you had to grow as a CEO in terms of wearing the different hats? Because obviously when you have those conversations with investors, lots of meetings, lots of planning, lots of spreadsheets, I imagine, and lots of, figuring out, how you explain the story to them and how you show them the potential of what's possible, in addition to having to run the business on a day-to-day basis.
It's a lifestyle almost, every day I'm in the office for a lot of hours and then home studying, into studying to an extent. I think that is the necessary growth that you have to do to succeed in the space. And, we're still early. I think one of the challenges we face is we're not measured by the same standards as other indoor farms. Like there is a generally held like KPIs for greenhouses and things that just don't apply to us. There is a little, that's sort of one of the things that's exciting about what we do, but it's also one of the risks. And so just trying to kind of paint a picture of how we benchmark against other connected hardware and things that maybe are outside of the vertical farming space has been really helpful.
Where are you seeing some innovations in the space? Because obviously with something like Gallery, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of, I imagine, relationships that you have with manufacturers, equipment, technology, talking about sensors, software, lots of moving. And I'm wondering what that supply chain looks like and what those relationships look like over time.
I think that has become one of our greatest strengths. And I think people often overlook just how difficult it is to make something. Like the idea might be good, the market might be great, but the execution on making products that are reliable, that you can engineer costs out of, that is something that we've decided to just own that. We actually are manufacturing ourselves, and the ability to drive cost and complexity out of the unit has been amplified by that decision. So that is something, being able to deliver a consistent product and have realistic lead times is something that we've been able to achieve over the last year or two, which I think is a huge milestone that's often overlooked. It's actually just super hard to make things consistently.
As I noticed that you had, obviously there's been a ton of publicity lately for Babylon. You were both selected, I think, as Forbes 30 under 30, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, so, I would say a great accolade. Lucky as me and my co-founder Graham that we were able to get that.
And then also you were featured in TechCrunch as well. So it's interesting when we talk about technology. Do you find that there's more availability to get exposure in the technology side as well because of the work you're doing here?
I think it is interesting. Like remotely managing a fleet of devices is kind of a new thing in general, and which we have a pretty unique application of that. Right, we're managing micro greenhouse and growing plants and all of the stuff that comes with that. So yeah, we do get some exposure on that front. And I think the nature of our product, right? Everyone wants one in their home. That's like the automatic reaction. Although we don't do consumer applications at this time, it does mean that people really relate with the product and what it represents.
That was interesting because when you see the form factor, it naturally lends itself well. If you have enough space in the home for something like that, is that something that's on the roadmap or like a mini gallery?
It is not clear at this time. We have all of the tools to do it. Like remote management is the core of what we do, and that is hardware agnostic. So we definitely see opportunities to develop systems for different markets, like the consumer space, or for different crop types. And that's kind of where we see we're being a little opportunistic on that front because it's not obvious the consumer market at this time.
Yeah.
But we could do it.
Yeah. How is the plan, and this might have been the plan from the time we last spoke, but how do you think about the growth of the team? How have you grown the team? And I'm also curious also about the different skill sets you need, because everything you described, you could almost have like a deep dive in subject matter experts on growth, on subject matter experts on software, on remote management, on technology, on supply chain issues. So you need folks that have those specific expertises. But obviously, there's a challenge in terms of who you can hire and how you hire. So I'm curious how you think about that challenge.
Yeah, I think there are different moving parts. Ultimately, it comes back to, I think, healthy crops and happy customers, right? So as long as everything's aligned behind those, it doesn't have to be as complicated as it sounds.
Yeah. And how has the team grown since we last chatted?
So actually, we have not grown the headcount that much.
Okay.
We're really focused at the moment on our go-to-market and sales, but ultimately we kind of laid the foundation with our seed round. Headcounts remain about flat there. And that's part of, I think, just trying to be disciplined around like how we're allocating resources. I think that's part of what we're trying to put to the test, right? If you can really remotely manage farms with software, then you shouldn't need to add too much. The headcount should not scale with the install base. So we're really trying to put that to the test, and we've kept our headcount flat for the better part of the last year.
I'm curious, just coming back to we chatted a little bit when we were in Las Vegas. Just personally, I'm curious, what was it about the opportunity to go see what was happening in person with these food deserts? Because what was interesting about the conference is you get the high level, you have the super big farms, you have everyone on stage talking about the mega farm potential. And what's interesting is there's a big difference between seeing the potential and people talking about, feeding the world, which you hear a lot of, but also this ability to actually go see what's happening literally with people like on the street who didn't grow up in a neighborhood with access to fresh food. And, this concept of a food desert is something that we've talked about as well. So when you saw that opportunity was available to have that tour, what was it that drew you to make sure you made time to go do that?
Yeah, it is, and it was a great experience, and great as in it's a challenge to see. It's a challenging environment, and I think it's all too common across the U.S. Right? I think food deserts and what they represent is something at the core of why we exist as a company. We're trying to create new ways for people to grow their own food, largely in urban areas, and while it's price prohibitive at this stage, we know that's not going to be the case forever, and that's something I feel as a company we can drive forward, is accessibility to these kinds of technology and this kind of sustainable growing. So to go and see that firsthand, I think is super impactful for me. It was a good reminder of why we're doing what we do.
Yeah.
Because, in the same way you go to these industry conferences, there's a lot of high level, there's a lot of talk about tech and AI and investment, but it's like, well, ultimately we're growing food.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it was important for me to see that. And again, the Green Side Up, the work they're doing is fantastic. And I hope we'll be partnering with them to deliver some microfarms to Vegas in the near future.
Do you think that's the model that works the best, to partner with folks who have those relationships on the ground, folks like the Green Side Up? Because it's interesting, because it's almost like a trust factor with a community and an education factor, because I think a lot of the times these communities, they don't know what they don't know. And if they've never had access to fresh produce and all they've known is like the Jack in the Box and the 99 cents like cheeseburger, there's a challenge between what's available with your budget and your desire to, maybe you do have the desire for that something nutritious or something, that's better for you and your family, but, either you don't have the money for it. So there's a lot of moving parts in there. Partnering with local governments, I think, is also something that people have talked about. But, what do you see just from your perspective in terms of some of the challenges to make that actually viable at the ground level?
I think especially with distributed farming solutions, it's all about people, right? Certainly at our company, that's really what matters is relationships. And I think the same extends to sales, especially when you're looking, whether it's in educational settings, community settings, there's a number of stakeholders that need to be involved. There's often grant funding and other things. And so you really need people who have got their finger on the pulse of what's out there. And that's certainly something we've seen success in, is when you partner up with community actors, they often know about resources that are available, people who are involved. And I think one thing we find is 9 times out of 10, people really want to do this. It's lining up the other things. There's resources that are the challenge. And so partnering with local people is important. And then, ultimately just making sure people have the resources and the education they need to understand what they're getting into. I think that is key to setting expectations for what we do and for all indoor farming. It's right, setting expectations correctly and making sure people are informed, because it is a decision, right? You're going to start growing your own food. Okay, great. You're going to get the output of that food.
Yeah.
It's going to be higher quality, and ultimately it can be a really beneficial experience. But you are taking up farming just because we made it really easy. And that's the same for all indoor farming solutions, especially at the community level, right? It's getting, and that's where we look at partnering with people who understand that, right? So if they're already urban farming, they probably think what we're doing is the easiest thing ever. And so it helped to find those people.
When you have conversations with new partners, new clients, what are some of the misconceptions in terms of what they think? Part of it may be that the fact that they think it might be easier than it is, but what else have you come across?
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting time, right? Where staffing shortages, other things play a factor in decision making. And I think we hear a lot of unsuccessful endeavors into urban farming of all sorts because people didn't really understand what they're getting into. And
Yeah.
so, do you have the time available? Do you understand the output that you're going to get? And ultimately, do you understand how to get the most value out of it? Like when we have engaged operators, this can be like absolute center piece for their dining operation. And we have some amazing success stories. And then in the same way, if they're not engaged, that can present some challenges. So yeah, I think setting expectations, making people realize that we make it really easy, but it doesn't mean it's fully automated. We've had people who, where we don't have robots like harvesting crops for them yet, although that's what some people might think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where are you seeing the most innovation when you think about the genomics, when you think about seeds, when you think about all the specifics that go into growing crops specifically for these types of environments? Where are you seeing innovations, or are you having conversations with folks on the seed side, on the genomics sides, to partner with them to create what you need to grow specifically in your farms?
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is these distributed farming systems are a tool,
Mm.
right? So you could have container farms, you could have micro farms that we do. You could also have kind of larger scale tower systems where
Yeah,
they're turnkey devices. They are a tool, and you've got to find the right application for those tools. So
yeah,
that fits in with the setting expectations, right? So we know for us, for certain applications where it's really successful and we found kind of a happy product and a market fit. And I think that is really where you see these tools being developed. And for specific applications, they can be amazingly successful. But ultimately, if you use the wrong tool for the wrong job, you're not going to have success.
yeah,
And so I think I'm most excited about distributed turnkey systems because I think they are ultimately opening up indoor farming and vertical farming to new markets that
yeah.
actually need it the most, and they may not know it yet. And then, yeah, I don't, genetics and stuff has not directly impacted us too much. I know there's a lot of hype around that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the big indoor greenhouses and vertical farms, the greenhouses have existed for decades. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement there, but that's a proven business model,
Yeah.
again, selling produce into the conventional supply chain at a more local level. But really the turnkey systems that are coming on the market and that are, I think, like ours, that are on the market now, I think they're really opening up indoor farming to new markets, and that's super exciting. So I expect to see that trend continue as remote management solutions like ours prove that you can do vertical farming in very different ways. We're going to see more innovation on that front.
Are you seeing any folks being more experimental in terms of the types of crops? I mean, I think you did list 45 different varieties. So there's a wide range of, I imagine, crops you can choose from with your environment. But are you seeing anyone pushing the limits of what's possible?
Yeah, I've seen some interesting stuff. I think we're particularly excited about more like heirloom varieties. I wouldn't say they're necessarily genetic, but like being able to grow stuff that you can't source
Yeah.
conventionally, I think opens up a lot of possibilities for culinary teams and for educational purposes. So that's something we're leaning into.
And as you think about the potential that's available now that you've got this round of funding in, let's look out maybe 12 months from now. What does the roadmap look like for you going forward?
Right now, it's just execution, getting out there in the market. I think we've got a great product, we've got some happy customers, and a lot of work to do to scale up our install base. That's really all we're focused on for the next 18 months.
I asked this the last time, but the answer may have changed since we last spoken. But what's a tough question you've been asking yourself recently?
Yeah, I think there are some underlying questions. We've proven that you can run these farms remotely and that we can, with relatively light touch, teach people to be happy. But what is it going to take to drive the cost of these units down? And I think and that's a bigger picture question, right? Because a lot of the sustainable solutions that exist that are going to be really important to the future, especially a climate resistant one, really is about driving the cost down and opening up the market, right? So I
Yeah.
think that is really top of mind for us is like how quick, what do we need to change and what can we do with the limited resources we have
Yeah.
to get the cost of our units down as quickly as we can to ultimately make them more accessible.
Where are you seeing the most growth for you personally as a CEO and as since you started the company?
You probably have to ask my co-founder or some of our team, but I try to be a lot more deliberate about meetings and
Yeah.
spending the right amount of time with
Yeah.
people, especially if they're working with me directly. I think before, as in everything's always rushed and there's always too many things to do, but making time is really important for the things that matter.
Yeah. One of the things I've been doing is leaving some space at the towards the end of these conversations. Given the increased visibility of the show, there's a lot of industry folks listening, a lot of your peers in the space listening as well. And what's been interesting for me is just the feedback that I've gotten from that perspective. So is there a message that you have specifically for this industry based on, what we've been talking about, or things that you're seeing from your end where, it's helpful to have this platform, and just want to give you that opportunity to share your thoughts?
Yeah, the bigger does not mean better, but I also think it's a question of focus. We're very different to a lot of the big indoor farms I mentioned earlier. We're not measured by the same things, but ultimately for us, it's a lot about capturing some of the soft benefits of indoor farming
Mm,
that I think people often overlook, but the ability to actually grow food in front of people and do it in a way that can really change the environment. So, when we install microfarms in the lobby of a hotel or in a dining room, it really changes the environment for the better.
yeah.
And I think that's capturing value in a way that very few other companies do, or very few other systems. And that's because we know our lane and we're focused on it. And I think that's something that seems to be emerging as a common trait is focus is key.
Yeah.
And not trying to do too many things at once is absolutely key to success. So we know our lane and we're just focused on executing in it. And in the same way, with you're seeing other super exciting companies kind of emerge, but just focusing on specific crop types, specific markets,
Yeah.
whatever it might be, is often or appears to be the key to succeeding.
Do you have any other indoor farming conferences scheduled for the rest of this year?
I believe we're going to the New York Ag
Yes.
Tech
I'll,
Innovation Summit.
I'll
Yeah,
be there. Yeah. Indoor Ag Tech NYC.
excellent.
Very good.
See you there.
So another question would be why people aren't looking at the ways these systems are being integrated together more closely.
Yeah, I think that is something that is not being asked enough. And ultimately, like we see ourselves as one part of the solution, right? And so whether it's with a local urban farming initiative, with a container farm, or even with a big kind of commercial greenhouse plant factory operation, our farms are a great way for them to kind of captivate the end consumer, placing them in retail outlets, placing them in schools, and I think all of these things are ultimately growing the market, right? The more people you can educate on the benefits of local and indoor grown product, the better. And I think we've really been looking at ways to partner with whether that's local farm initiatives or any of the solutions provided out there, because we can be an additional revenue source for them. We can be
Mm,
a way to kind of capture that end consumer. I think we're ultimately educating a lot of people on the space anyway, just
yeah.
by growing ourselves. But I think there are so many opportunities for growers to work together and deploy distributed solutions alongside their existing operations. I think that's often overlooked at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's something people don't think about. I think they almost envision it as an either or solution, like you have to pick one or the other, and there's not this opportunity to actually like have a hybrid approach or even partner together as well, which I think is fascinating.
Well, I think that the partnering is like, you got to focus on your thing and we focus on our thing, but it doesn't mean you're not like we can come and do it for you
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
can
yeah,
see some of the benefits. When you talk about these soft benefits, I think that's how we see it at least is everyone's got their lane and we should be looking to work together more.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming back on and sharing the updates. It was great to connect with you in person as well, because obviously we have these conversations remotely, but it's just nice to shake your hand and be there in person. And then we got some extended time on the tour, which was great as well, just to kind of see what's happening on the ground. So looking forward to get reconnected again in New York. And congrats again on the recent round. And we'll be sending folks to babylonmicrofarms.com. Anywhere else you want to send folks to get them connected and stay up to date?
Yeah, just follow us on LinkedIn or on Instagram.
Okay, we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes as well. So thanks again for
Great.
getting us caught up
Thanks,
to
Greg.
date.